Welcome to the Great Loop Radio podcast, brought to you by America's Great Loop Cruisers Association. We're dedicated to sharing Great Loop information and inspiration with those actively cruising, planning for, or dreaming about a Great Loop adventure. I'm Kim Rousseau. I'm the director of AGLCA. Today we're going to talk about a pretty important topic, and that is man overboard and how to deal with that, how to retrieve someone who is in the water and get them back aboard the boat where they're safe and sound. So Robert Rice, who many of you know if you're regular listeners, he's been quite a frequent guest for us because he's got a lot of great information to share. He'll be joining us to cover that topic. Before we jump in, as always, I do want to take a moment to recognize and thank our Admiral sponsors who support AGLCA at the highest level. They are Kathy All. She is an Edward Jones certified financial planner. Great Loop Yacht Sales, Passage Maker Trawler Fest, Skipper Bob Publications, and Waterway Guide Media. As always, we encourage our listeners and viewers to support these businesses that support the Great Loop. And with the business completed, I'd like to welcome back Rob Rice to Great Loop Radio. Rob, thanks for joining me once again.
Glad to be here. We always have great conversations.
We do, and we always get a lot of good feedback. Tell us a little bit about yourself for those who haven't heard you here before.
So I've been boating for, I don't know, 20, not quite 20 years. It's mostly my daughter's fault. She got involved in a Girl Scout sailing program that's extremely active and very well done. And she got involved, and then I got involved, feeling like I needed to do my part to help make the program work for her and for the other kids in the program. So I ended up being a sailing instructor. I ended up running the sort of managing the instructional side of that program for several years. She's long since graduated out of Girl Scouts, and I'm still involved over there as a sailing instructor. I have sailing instructor qualifications, 5 of them from the American Sailing Association for teaching large boat sailing. And I'm a member of the Coast Guard's unpaid all-volunteer component called the Coast Guard Auxiliary. This is a uniquely Coast Guard organization. So we are really members of the Coast Guard, but in a different way than folks who are in the active duty, the military members. And part of what we're going to talk today comes out of my experience with the Coast Guard Auxiliary.
And in addition to all that, your Great Loop boat is there in your screensaver behind you and your background. So tell us about Slow Dancing.
So Slow Dancing is a 40-foot Endeavor Pilot House Power Cat. We've had it a couple of years now. I brought the boat home. It was at Port Charles Harbor, just north of St. Louis, when we bought it, and I brought the boat home down the Western Rivers into Mobile Bay, turned right, and came through the Gulf ICW to get it to our home waters in the Houston Galveston area. So we did about 1,600 cruising miles in that, from multiple hops. And then we've done cruising in the local area. It's a lovely boat, absolutely lovely, perfect for us. It has a fabulous master stateroom with walk-around queen bed, an absolutely enormous shower in the master head. Lots of storage space in the master stateroom, a nice, small but nice guest stateroom, guest head shower, and a good, very comfortable salon galley, and a lovely pilot house that's weather protected for driving the boat underway.
Yeah,
So it's stable and comfortable. And given that it's a power cat, it's very nimble on its feet. So it's very maneuverable. Don't have our stern thrusters, but with a power cat like that, 2 widely spaced propellers, you don't need them. So my docking is I pull up until my boat slip is directly off my left-hand shoulder. I stop the boat, spin it on its axis 90 degrees, and pull straight into the slip. It's just some stuff is just trivially easy with a power cat. So I love it.
Yeah, it's a beautiful boat, and we'll look forward to hopefully seeing it in a looper crawl at one of our rendezvous as you
one of these
get ready
days,
to start your loop. One of these days we'll get you there. Well, today we want to talk about man overboard. And, it's a serious topic. We kind of walk a fine line here because we don't want to scare anyone into thinking that this is something that happens on everybody's Great Loop, because if it doesn't.
It's unlikely.
And the whole objective is to avoid being in the water. And if you follow, kind of the best practices, which we'll touch on, you can avoid being in the water. But we also want you to be prepared in the unlikely event that that does happen. And Rob, you participated recently in a Coast Guard exercise and part of your role with the auxiliary there. And you called the exercise kind of sobering, this man
Absolutely.
overboard exercise.
Absolutely.
So
So,
tell us what the exercise was and why you found it to be kind of eye-opening in a very sobering way.
yeah, so I'm a member of the Coast Guard's Auxiliaries Boat Crew program, and we train and qualify under the small boat crew member standards. It's the same standards that the active duty small boat crew train and qualify under. And for example, to complete my qualification for boat crew, I had to have an underway checkoff by a career petty officer, so a career small boat guy from the Coast Guard came from New Orleans to do this underway checkoff. So it's pretty serious business. And our qualification program is about 85, 90% the same as what the active duty folks have to do to qualify to be a boat crew. That qualification program includes some man overboard practice, which is pretty typical. And so I'm going to describe that, and then I'm going to describe what we did, which was vastly different.
Mm-hmm.
So what's pretty typical, and this is what's in the qualification program, is you practice some, and the emphasis here is some of the basic skills of doing a man overboard recovery. So for example, for us to qualify for boat crew, one of the evolutions, one of the skill practices is somebody like me is driving the boat and another guy standing behind me I can't see decides to heave out a boat cushion and yell man overboard. And then we have to come around, pick the boat cushion back up and get that all achieved without running over the boat cushion and get them back on board within a short period of time. That's comparatively easy. It's an important piece of the puzzle, but it's only a very small piece of the puzzle. What was eye-opening and sobering all at one time was the Coast Guard gave our group permission to do something which normally they don't like doing, which is letting auxiliaries get in the water. So they authorized us to put a boat into the small boat basin at the local Coast Guard base and to put a person in the water and for us to actually practice getting a person back into a boat. And what we discovered was that that exercise range, depending on whether the person actively helped or pretended to be injured and did not actively help, ranged between impossible and extremely hard.
Yeah.
And this was with a group of guys, sort of looper age and looper fitness, because we're not active duty military members. We're not subject to the Coast Guard's physical fitness standards. So we're not physically fit like military members. We're like your average looper age crowd of guys. So it was, I think on the day that we did that, 4 or 5 guys, sort of average looper age, late 50s into very early 70s. All of us, nobody disabled or anything, but nobody spectacularly physically fit. And one of the guys jumped into the bay wearing a life jacket and our Coast Guard issued survival gear. And we tried to get him back in the boat.
Yeah. And I want to kind of dig into how that went. But, even years ago with, kids, if you're boating and you're doing that kind of weekend boating, if you've ever been in the water because you're tubing or you're skiing, a couple of years ago, we went to the Dry Tortugas and we're snorkeling and needed to get back in the dinghy.
Mm-hmm.
It gets a lot harder as you get older.
It's a lot harder
And if
than
you're
you
just,
think.
yeah, and you're just thinking about, completely in the water because you meant to be, and trying to get back into a dinghy is a challenge, and we found a great way to do it. But so think about that if you didn't mean to be in the water, so you're probably a little bit surprised, shell shocked, depending on the temperature of the water.
Disoriented, right.
Disoriented is a
Surprised,
great word
shocked,
for it.
disoriented for sure.
um
When I was young, I was learning to water ski with some friends. We were out on a lake and I took a bad tumble and wrenched my shoulder pretty good. And I had to have considerable help to get back into the boat, just because I'd kind of twisted my shoulder in a bad tumble off the water skis.
Yeah.
That's the kind of problem we're looking at.
Yeah.
The problem is even larger if the person is unconscious or more substantially banged up, and so really unable to provide any assistance.
Yeah. So let's start with the circumstance if someone unexpectedly finds themselves in the water from a typical type of loop or boat
Mhm,
and is fine, does have the presence of mind, got
mhm.
over that initial disorientation and bit of shock at being in the water and can help get themselves out. Still not an easy task, but go ahead
It's-
and tell us how this exercise went when the
yeah,
person in the
so
water was capable.
right. So the boat that we were using was not a looper sized boat. So it was a small fishing boat, relatively low gunnels. Uh, what we first tried was, well, there were four of us, me and three other guys, sort of my age and demographic, sort of, looper age folks, typical looper age folks, and the one guy in the water. And so we asked the guy in the water to come to the side of the boat and to see if we could lift him up out of the water. We couldn't do it.
Mhm.
We physically could not lift the guy up out of the water and over the side of the boat. And that's a boat with gunnels with freeboard of maybe 18 inches, 2 feet. Not a very tall gap to get over, but there just wasn't enough strength between four guys lifting this our friend out of the water. One of the challenges with a lot of people is how do you grab onto and how do you crowd in together? If we couldn't do it with four, you can't do it with one.
Right.
Okay, so side of the boat is impossible. We tried rigging a line to make a loop that our friend could stand on. And the problem there is your feet swing under the boat. And so you can't stand up because when you put your foot on the line on this loop of rope, your foot just pushes under the boat. Now that's going to depend on the shape of the hull.
Mhm.
But with this fishing boat we were working off of, the hull curved sharply away under the water to sort of a keel shape, relatively flat bottomed. And there was just that did not help at all. So that was not a useful strategy. We then shifted to, okay, let's go to the back of the boat where there's even less clearance above the water, so less of a gap to get above. And we tried hauling the guy in by just grabbing him, pulling him in, and we still couldn't do it.
Mhm.
So there was a metal swim ladder at the back of the boat. And in deep water, that swim ladder is the only way you're going to get back in the boat. But even that is extremely difficult. So it's going to depend on the length of that swim ladder and really kind of how substantial it is. So a really flimsy swim ladder may not be as much help as you think it's going to be. And it's going to be harder in deep water than you probably think it is. Um, that was kind of an eye opener in and of itself. The real sobering moment was when the person in the water pretended to be injured and could not help.
Mhm.
And that was, we couldn't get him back in the boat at all.
Yeah. No
We
swim
tried a
club or a
variety.
swim ladder
Yeah,
becomes useless
yeah,
in that
yeah,
circumstance.
yeah. So it might be ever so slightly easier if you have a swim step that is just at the level of the water. But still, you've got to get that person, you kind of got to get that person's center of gravity, center of mass up above the level of the water so you can drag them onto the swim platform. So the boat we were working with did not have a swim platform. That I am convinced that would be a little easier.
Mhm.
But what our discovery was, it didn't matter what we tried. If the person in the water could not actively assist us, we couldn't get them back in the boat. That was we kind of stared at each other and said, okay, we have to rethink everything we thought we knew about man overboard recovery because we don't know diddly squat.
Yeah.
And we
So,
thought we were pretty
mhm.
well prepared. And this is, a thing we thought about and kind of practiced. And it was sobering.
Yeah. Well, and so, we're talking about right now a group of four men with
Mhm.
experience,
Yeah.
boating experience, Coast Guard, safety experience, all of those
Mhm.
things.
Right.
Let's kind of take that back to loopers now. You
Right.
typically don't have that many people on a looper boat.
Yeah.
It's
So
typically a little bit of a bigger boat than what you were using for this exercise. So break this down. What can loopers do to try and mitigate the difficulty should they happen to end up in the water?
Okay, so the first thing is the most obvious: stay on the boat.
Yes.
Do everything you can to ensure that everybody stays on the boat. And that's really kind of the first conversation I have with anybody who comes onto my boat is your first and most important responsibility is stay on the boat.
Mm-hmm.
And to have life jackets on. The Coast Guard requires us in the boat crew when we're doing stuff under Coast Guard orders. It's 100% life jacket wear all the time, from the time the boat leaves the dock until the time the boat returns to the dock. And that's what the active duty folks do. That's what we have to do. It's the right thing. Recreational boaters tend to be a little more relaxed about it. What we do on my boat is life jackets are, if they're not actually on me, that life jacket is on the chair next to me. It is within instant touch, within instant reach, not behind me 6 feet at the back of the fly bridge. It's right next to me. And if things get at all complicated, I put that life jacket on. I kind of hear folks talk about, well, in a lock, the lock master wants you to put the life jacket on, but that's silly. Why should we have to do that? I'm not going to do it unless the lock master makes a point of it. You should, because you're going to be doing stuff on deck, and the odds of somebody going overboard are low, but the consequence of somebody going overboard is high. The Coast Guard keeps pretty good statistics about what happens to people who go overboard. Folks who go overboard unexpectedly. If you were expecting the thing to happen, you wouldn't have been caught unaware and gone overboard. So it's not like you can stop and say, in the middle of falling overboard, you can't stop and say, hold on, time out, let me put on my life jacket first. That, of course, doesn't happen. The Coast Guard statistics are pretty grim. People who go overboard without a life jacket tend not to have a good experience, a good outcome. People who go overboard with a life jacket overwhelmingly have a good outcome. So it's pretty straightforward. First and most important thing is everybody's got to stay on the boat, and you have to do everything you can to ensure that that's the way things take place. And then everybody needs to have life jackets on. So I think the lesson from this is, the first and foremost is let me kind of tell you the rules on my boat. Nobody goes on deck unless we've had a conversation about why you're going to go on deck and what we're going to do, and whether we need to do this right now or whether we can do it at a different point. My boat's wide and very stable unless we catch, 3-foot waves hitting the side of the boat, and then it gets very bouncy very quickly. Mm-hmm. So we have a conversation before anybody goes on deck while the boat is underway. Nobody goes in the aft cockpit while the boat is underway, because I can't see the aft cockpit from the pilot house. So I don't know what's happening to somebody back there.
Right. Let's take a quick break and play a message from one of our sponsors. When we come back, I do want to jump into some strategies that perhaps you can offer for loopers that might help get somebody back in the boat should the unexpected happen and they end up in the water. So we'll be back in a moment. Discover Cypress Landing, your Inner Banks home port on Chakawinity Bay. Boat, golf, live, and play in North Carolina's friendliest community with 700 custom homes, a picturesque 220-slip marina, and the number 8 ranked state public golf course set among forests, lakes, streams, and wildlife. This award-winning community offers golf, event activities, and stellar facilities, from a fitness center, swimming pools, and miles of trails to tennis, pickleball, and more. 60 miles upstream from the Outer Banks and ICW, away from urban congestion but near necessities, Cypress Landing invites the looper community to discover home, where active lifestyle meets southern hospitality. Ahoy all loopers! Discover the Marlborough Yacht Club on the historic Hudson River. We can accommodate vessels up to 52 feet, offering premium 91-octane non-ethanol fuel, water, pump-out, and dockside electric services for your convenience. Experience our top-notch clubhouse with commercial-grade kitchen, Scallywags bar, all while enjoying the sights and sounds inside and out at the Marlborough Yacht Club. Savor the breathtaking views from our terrace and pavilion with barbecue stations and fireside pit. Unwind by our swimming pool and patio for those sun-drenched days at the club. Explore the Marlboro Yacht Club at marlboroyachtclubny.org or email us at info@marlboroyachtclubny.org. See you this season. We are back on the Great Loop Radio podcast. Today we are talking about man overboard or woman overboard, as the case may be. But we are chatting with Rob Rice. He is a regular here on the Great Loop Radio podcast. He is filling us in on a pretty sobering exercise he had the opportunity to participate in, where they discovered how challenging it really can be to get somebody back aboard a boat. So we've talked about the experience you had in that exercise, Rob. Tell us, did that lead to some strategies that you can recommend to help get someone back in the boat?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things. First, we talked about this before the break. Make sure everybody stays on the boat. That's the most important part. Be really thoughtful about life jacket wear and be kind of obsessive on that. Anybody who goes on deck while the boat is underway needs to have a life jacket on. If you're in a lock, you need to have a life jacket on. I would say entering or leaving a marina, you need to have a life jacket on because somebody's going to end up going out on deck to heave lines. And if they're out there heaving lines, there's a greater risk, not huge, but there is a larger risk that they could end up going overboard accidentally. So that the first and foremost is probably the simplest, and that's just be really thoughtful about where people are on the boat when it's underway. Be thoughtful about the conditions. You start there. I think the next set of strategies is if somebody does go overboard, they need to have some flotation to hold on to. So they need to be wearing that life jacket ideally. If they're not wearing a life jacket, you need to immediately throw them something that floats. Two kinds of things. One is sort of the typical floating seat cushion thing with webbing loop handles that you can buy at West Marine or other marine supply stores. You can frisbee one of those once you kind of get the hang of the motion. You can frisbee one of those a fair distance. Throwing that out immediately to somebody who's gone overboard does two things for you. It gives that person something to hold on to improve their flotation while you turn the boat around and come back and get them. The other thing it does is it's a brightly colored object that floats in the water. If you're looking for somebody who is overboard in the water, particularly if they're not wearing a life jacket, you're looking for a target about the size of a volleyball, their head. It is extremely difficult. Once you lose sight of a person in the water, it is extremely difficult to find them again. So the Coast Guard training, the standard for us is that if somebody goes overboard, because we have boats with multiple people on them, if somebody shouts and points man overboard and does nothing but point at the person in the water, while the person at the helm only drives and then pays attention to where the pointing person is pointing to help them find that person overboard. So something to hold on to is great. The other thing that's really important is this is all vastly more complicated at night. So if you're underway at night, this is a different exercise, but the same kind of sobering realization. A person overboard at night is extremely hard to find. And so life jackets on my boat now have small water activated strobe lights. If you go overboard at night, I need that flashing light to be able to find you and come back and pick you up.
Right.
So
If you're cruising a lot at night, that might be something you want to consider adding to your safety equipment.
And most loopers don't cruise at night, not intentionally, and bringing my boat home post-purchase and that 1,1600 miles, I think I only ended up moving the boat at night once. I found it an enjoyable experience to be sort of dancing along in the dark with the barge captains at night. That was kind of fun. It didn't spook me or anything, but not everybody's comfortable with that. There will be times probably on the loop when there's a long stretch between marinas or until you get to that anchorage that you want. And so you end up, or you get caught in some bad weather or lock closures or something that slows you down. So you end up operating at night when you didn't initially plan to. So you kind of have to plan for that possibility.
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked about life jackets, staying on the boat. So what happens if somebody does go overboard? You're going to throw them something that floats, both to give them something to hold on to, but also to give you a brightly colored visual target to help come back and find them. That means that those square seat cushions you buy for your boat should not be blue. They should be yellow or orange or red or fluorescent green or something bright. It may be visually offensive, to the decor of your boat, but that's not the point. The point is you want something that stands out visually when you're trying to come back and find that person in the water. Next thing is a rigid metal swim ladder, I think is essential. Um, Even if you have a swim platform, you still need help to get up out of the water onto the swim platform. And if you don't have a swim platform, absolutely essential that you have a rigid metal swim ladder. It needs to be mounted. Probably it's going to have to be at the back of the boat, at the stern, at the point where there's the least amount of clearance from the boat down to the water. And ideally as long a ladder as you can manage on your boat, and still have it fold up and be out of the way. A longer ladder, it makes it easier to get up out of the water than a short one. Some kind of soft rope or webbing ladder is probably not going to be effective. You're better off, I think, pretty clearly having a rigid metal swim ladder. That's something you can buy, that kind of thing, at West Marine or other marine dealers. Your local, marina repair yard can install it for you. It's not a big project.
Okay.
Next thing is something called a LifeSling. That's a brand name for a particular thing. There are some others like it. But the LifeSling is like a floating sort of U-shaped horse collar thing with a long line attached to it. The idea is you heave out the LifeSling to the person in the water. And if needed, you drive circles around the person in the water and it sort of spirals the LifeSling into them and they can grab it and put themselves into it. And then you can pull that line to pull them back to the boat. That does a lot right there. We get the person back to the boat. We've got them some extra flotation. We've got them attached to the boat by a line so they're not going to drift away. That gives us some breathing room to figure out, okay, what do we do next? That doesn't get them out of the water, though, and back onto the boat. To get them out of the water and back onto the boat, particularly with only one person or one or two people, you're going to have some mechanical advantage, and that means some sort of block and tackle arrangement. The LifeSling folks have long ago figured that out, and LifeSling will cheerfully sell you a block and tackle arrangement to make it easy for you to pull somebody up out of the water. The trick there is you have to have something relatively, a mounting point, relatively high on the boat that's capable of taking the strain of lifting a, 150 to 200 pound person up out of the water. That's kind of the challenge of that. I think with a swim platform, you could sort of use that block and tackle arrangement to pull the person up onto the swim platform and recover them that way. That's the one made by the LifeSling folks. I've forgotten what the price is. It's relatively expensive, several $100, but it's something like that is essential to be able to get the person up out of the water. So I have one on my boat now. The other guys in the Coast Guard Auxiliary Boat Crew program have something similar on their boat now as well.
Interesting. Yeah, because I don't know a whole lot of looper boats that have those. And again,
and
a
that
looper
LifeSling,
going overboard is unusual.
yeah,
But if it does happen, you certainly want to be prepared. And I see the LifeSlings a lot, but I don't know
yes.
that many have the block and tackle to go along
No,
with it.
probably not. And most people who have a LifeSling have probably never unpacked it. It came
Probably
on the
not.
boat when they bought it, and they have no idea what's actually in that bag. So that's the next thing is unpack that LifeSling, stretch out the line, inspect the whole thing. Does it inspire confidence that it's in good shape? It probably is if the outside bag is complete and whole and not, fallen away, rotted. As long as the whole thing has been protected from sun damage, it's probably okay. But you want to inspect that LifeSling, kind of know what you've got. It needs to be mounted someplace. The LifeSling needs to be mounted someplace so that the person who is still on the boat can easily heave the thing out to the person who's in the water. That probably means it needs to be mounted in the same space as the helm. So in my boat, it's on the flybridge, ready to heave out if somebody goes overboard.
So anything else you can recommend to prepare for the possibility or to be ready to get, to help you get that person out of the water?
Two things. One is your other option, particularly for a looper, you're likely to have a dinghy. That's pretty common for loopers. So think about how you might use the dinghy as an aid to go get and retrieve that person who's in the water. You could stop the boat, anchor, drop the dinghy, go over to where the person is in the water. You may still have the problem of getting them into the dinghy, but if you can get to them, get a line around them, get them, flotation, and get them attached so they don't drift away, you then have some time to figure out what to do next. Um, I would say the next thing is everybody on board the boat sort of needs to think about, okay, what's our strategy going to be? So if it's a looping couple, very common, you guys need to talk about, okay, what do we do if one of us goes overboard?
Mhm.
And step through the action plan about what's supposed to happen. So there's a certain amount of skill involved in turning the boat around promptly and coming back to where that person went overboard, finding them, bringing the person alongside the boat without running them over or giving them a propeller strike injury. Those are skills that you need to practice. Um, and, pretty common for a looping couple. One of them is likely to be pretty boat savvy, the other less so. So everybody needs to practice that. The real problem is what happens if the more boat savvy person is the one who goes overboard, and the less boat skilled person is the one who's left at the helm. They have to be able to operate the boat and turn it around and bring it back to the person in the water, and at least bring the boat alongside where you can then throw them something to float with, toss out the life sling, pull them to the boat, attach the line to the boat. And then here's my next piece of advice is everybody on the boat needs to know how to operate the Marine VHF radio and needs to be comfortable with the idea of calling the Coast Guard on channel 16. So calling the Coast Guard on channel 16 is the same idea as calling 911 on a telephone.
Mhm.
And if you think you have a problem, you call the Coast Guard, explain the problem, and ask for their help. They're not going to be upset at you because you suffered a man overboard, but before they got there, you got them back on board somehow. You call them back and say, "Hey, we got our person back on board. We're good now."
Mhm.
But I would call them absolutely, or sooner rather than later. Um, if you're in the Western Rivers or the ICW, I would also probably put out a distress call on channel 13, that bridge to bridge navigational channel where you're talking to towboat captain to make meeting and passing arrangements. I would put out a call on channel 13 saying I've lost a person overboard. I am willing to guess that a tow pushing a barge string will do what it can to safely stop that barge string at an appropriate point. They often, very often, my observation is, have a small boat hanging at the back of the tow. I would bet they would put their small boat in the water and come to your aid.
Yeah. So there's generally, even if it's not Coast Guard assistance, other loopers, other
Yes,
commercial traffic, other
absolutely.
recreational traffic, don't hesitate to reach out for that assistance when it's needed. And I'm sure that's one of your suggestions,
Yeah,
Rob. If you
absolutely.
can't get the person back in the boat, what are some of the
Absolutely.
steps you should take besides calling the Coast Guard and putting out an alert for other boats to perhaps offer
Yeah,
assistance?
yeah. So if you can't get them back into the boat, and I think if your person in the water is at all injured, they're going to have a hard time getting back into the boat. So if it becomes certainly if it becomes obvious that this is going to be a problem, call the Coast Guard.
Mhm.
And you're going to do that on channel 16. And in the process of doing that, you're going to be alerting boaters around you that you've got this problem. Loopers, if you're traveling with other loopers, we need to come to each other's aid. So if you hear somebody's got a person in the water, figure out if you're nearby and come to their aid if that's something you can safely do.
Yep, absolutely.
Uh, I would say the other sort of things you can do to be prepared for this is to get in the habit of having sort of a risk management conversation every day before the boat takes off. Are we ready to do this? Are we in good physical shape? Did we get enough sleep last night? Is the weather okay for this? Are crosswinds too crazy in the ICW for us to be leaving the dock today? What do we need to do? Do we have enough time to do this? What are the challenges we face today? I really have that kind of conversation. In the Coast Guard Auxiliary and the boat crew program, we have a very structured conversation about those sort of risk management plans. But that's the basic idea. Do we have the right people? Do we have enough people? Is the equipment safe to operate for this? What we're going to do? Is the weather okay? What are the risks? Have we appreciated the risk? What can we do to mitigate those risks? That's a kind of conversation that you really need to have every time you leave the dock. It may not be a super formal, elaborate one, but are we ready to go? Is the weather okay? Is everybody, in good shape today for us to go underway, or should we stay at the dock another day? To have that sort of conversation every day, I think is actually really important.
And then that's a
Uh,
great tip. I think a lot of
yeah,
loopers do that related to the weather, but don't necessarily assess the other pieces of that. Is everybody feeling well and able today?
yeah,
And there's a common weather related saying for loopers is that the one
yeah,
veto rule. That's all it takes.
absolutely.
One person doesn't feel like the weather window is appropriate for cruising
Yeah,
that day, and they don't go. And the same really should
I,
apply for how you are
absolutely.
feeling and how the boat is doing and all of those things. Um, you know,
Right.
the loop is a very safe adventure, but
Absolutely.
safety still needs to be front and center and paramount. So, and with
Yeah.
that in mind, I don't know if we've missed any of the points you wanted to hit on, Rob,
Uh,
for the people, but I
just,
know we also wanted to talk a little bit
yeah,
about large dogs, but anything else
yeah.
on the people aboard you want to make sure gets
Um,
across?
so just, I would say if you are operating your boat at night, that requires sort of a special measure of caution because the challenge of finding a man overboard at night is like two orders of magnitude more difficult. So you really want to be thoughtful and careful about that. Um, yeah.
Another,
Okay. So
just
go ahead.
another quick point on that as well is if we are in any abnormal conditions, whether it's at night, whether the sea state is a little bit more sporty than we had anticipated or would like. Make sure you're communicating with your crewmates as you are moving around the boat so that if
Absolutely.
you are going down below for something, they know when to expect you back. And if you don't show back up on the helm at the time you're kind of expected, it's just an indicator, it's just an extra safety measure that we use um, when
100% agree.
when needed. And then the other thing, not having been in a career that had any kind of apparently this is a very common thing that I was never aware of, but the 3 points of contact rule I
Yeah.
have found very helpful when somebody told me that on the boat, particularly if I'm moving from the fly bridge to the cockpit for some reason while we're underway. I make sure that I'm not carrying so much stuff that I'm walking up steps without that third point of contact, without having a hand on a handrail or some place that is going to help me keep my balance. And I think that's
Yeah.
super important. And had nobody said to me, well, you need 3 points of contact, I may not have put those pieces together the way my brain works
Mhm.
on my own. But once somebody said that, I said, well, that makes all sorts of sense. That's just helping me balance as I'm moving around the
Right.
boat. So again,
So
it's
the
all
other
about
one,
staying on and not
right.
ending up in the water.
So the other little tiny nuance about what you just talked about
Mm-hmm.
is don't be in a position to fumble your cell phone while you're moving around on the boat because that's probably the one thing where you're likely to lunge for it and end up going overboard. So make sure your cell phone is in a pocket securely before you start moving around, or ideally just leave the thing below or leave it on the fly bridge or something. Don't carry it around with you while you're moving around on the boat because I have caught myself. I nearly dropped my cell phone overboard. And that was the one time where it was like, oh, I almost did this, flying leap lunge to grab it. Fortunately, it didn't go overboard, but I can see that being a circumstance where you could easily do yourself some harm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right,
So
let's
go
talk
ahead.
about the dogs.
Okay. So this is top of mind for me because we have a big dog. So we have an 85-pound German Shepherd. The problem of getting a big dog back on board is like the same problem as getting an injured person back on board. My German Shepherd would be extremely unhappy, but not a lot of help if he's in the water. So you really do. This is serious business. I think you need to think through the question of if we have, particularly with big dogs, and here I'm thinking about any dog that you can't reach down and scoop up in one hand. So our first family dog was like a 40-pound border collie. She would have been, I would have these same kinds of thoughts about that dog as well, because that's not a one-handed pick up and carry kind of problem. So, but for a large dog, you really do need to think through these problems. It's going to be the same sort of challenge of trying to lift an 85-pound dog straight up 2 feet out of the water who's wiggling and unhappy and distressed and who can't materially help you in the process. So, first thing is that dog needs a life jacket just like you do. So, the dog needs a PFD. It's a puppy flotation device. Um, the thing about people life jackets is they are regulated and approved by the U.S. Coast Guard. Dog life jackets are not. So you are 100% on your own to find a life jacket that's going to be supportive for your dog. I think you need to think about one thing really carefully, and that is you need that life jacket not just for flotation for your dog, but also to provide a handle so you can grab and lift. I don't know how you'd get a dog out of the water if they weren't wearing a life jacket, big dog. I don't know how you'd get a big dog out of the water if you didn't have a handle to grab and lift. And so what you want to look at is the structure or design of that life jacket. Is there a very substantial, well reinforced webbing handle across the top, sort of mid back, shifted towards the shoulders a little bit, that's stout enough that you can lift the dog completely up? And then the other piece of that puzzle is you need to spread the load of the dog's weight broadly across the dog's rib cage. So you need a wide band of fabric underneath the dog's rib cage so that when you lift the dog up by the handle on the life jacket, that load is spread all the way sort of evenly across their rib cage. And then if you have dogs, anytime you're trying to teach your dog something, a new skill requires teaching and practice. And this is a skill the dog's going to have to learn with you. And that is, putting on the life jacket, being comfortable wearing the life jacket. Those are skills the dog needs to learn before you cast off the dock lines, but also being lifted in the life jacket. So this is something my German Shepherd and I practice every once in a while. He puts on the life jacket, wears it around the house, prances around and says, "Look at me." And then I lift him up by the handle in the life jacket. I don't lift him far, but I lift him a couple inches off the floor and he looks at me reproachfully and I set him back down.
Yeah.
That's a skill too that the dog needs to be comfortable with. You don't want your dog to panic when you lift them by the life jacket. The other thing that we have for our dog that I think is going to be useful and helpful is boat shoes. Well, not really boat shoes. They're like very stretchy socks, very small but stretchy socks with rubber grippy pattern on the bottom. Getting your dog to consent to wear some kind of shoe is a challenge, and they walk really funny until they get comfortable with it.
Yeah,
A
for
lot of sort
sure.
of high stepping stuff going on. But I think that's going to be useful. Fiberglass, especially slightly damp fiberglass, is very slippery for a dog.
Yeah.
And so boat shoes for the dog, I think, is actually important. Smaller dogs may be a different issue, but if you're talking about a substantial dog, I mean, be realistic. An 85-pound dog who goes overboard is like the problem of trying to get your middle schooler back into the boat, except your middle schooler can help you.
Right.
And our German Shepherd can't. And that dog's going to be frantic. And you need a way to promptly rescue them. And I think a life jacket is the only way. The dog needs that extra flotation while they're waiting for you to come get them. And you need that handle on the dog's life jacket to be able to pick them back up. I will also say, after we did some night man overboard exercises with Coast Guard, I added a water activated strobe light to the dog's life jacket.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it's hard enough to find a person's head floating in the water, my black and tan and brown German Shepherd who's floating low in a life jacket is going to be even harder to find. I also added more reflective tape to the dog's life jacket, in addition to the little water activated strobe light.
Makes
All of that
complete
just ups
sense.
the odds that we'll be able to find them again and go back and get them.
Yeah. And the same goes for the dogs. It's better to avoid the whole situation by keeping them
Absolutely.
on the boat. I can see
100%.
in your screenshot behind you that you've got some netting that I see
Yes.
with a lot of boats that do have pets aboard to keep them from going through the railing.
Yeah, so the netting came courtesy of the prior owners who had
Mm-hmm.
what I call little yappy dogs,
Mm-hmm.
two of them, if I remember right. So those dogs, they were small, I don't know, 5 pounds. I mean, they were pretty small. So the netting was absolutely essential to keep those little dogs from sliding overboard. With my German Shepherd, I'm a little more worried about him sort of poking his nose through the railing, leaning over too far, and going overboard by accident. So, we kind of looked at the netting. I looked at the gates in the railing on the side, added some netting panels there I could clip into place so that those side gates weren't a problem. And then at the stern of the boat, there's open areas back there that just had a bar that came across. Sorry, just had one lifeline that came across. I added a second line that clipped on, and then a netting panel in between. So, yeah, I think you really need to think about the strategy of how you keep that dog on board the boat if you're going to take a dog with you.
Yeah, and that goes for boarding as well.
Yeah,
Getting in and out of the
absolutely.
dinghy to the mothership if you're at an anchorage. So practice all those
Absolutely.
things with your dogs, especially the larger ones that you just can't pick up and place in the dinghy,
Yeah.
because those are the points of failure
Yeah.
that if you have not
Exactly.
practiced, that the dog could end up in the
Exactly.
water. So
Yeah.
Rob, this has been really enlightening. Again, it's very unusual for a looper to end
Right.
up in the water, but we want
Unlikely
you to
to
be
happen.
ready. Unlikely,
Right.
unusual. I think I know of two that ended
Yeah.
well. But we want you to be ready, and that's why we like to cover these safety issues. And
Right.
there's nobody better at it than Rob. So thank you for joining us today to walk through these details. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'll send you, Kim, some links to some articles. BoatUS has a couple of good articles about thinking through man overboard recovery that maybe you can put in the links on the podcast.
Absolutely. Send them my way. For those of you watching or listening, they'll be in the video description on the YouTube version. They'll be in the episode notes on the true podcast version that you're just getting the audio version. So, Rob, thanks again. And to everyone who's watched or listened today, we'll be back next week with another episode of the Great Loop Radio podcast. Until then, safe cruising.